Imagine a young woman quietly walking through the halls of Windsor Castle. She is not seeking attention. She is not chasing headlines, but she carries something precious, something that belonged to a queen, and this simple act of inheritance has sparked a fury that is shaking the royal family to its core. This is a story about a grandmother's love, a grandfather's trust, and a family divided by blood and by marriage. Lady Louise Windsor has always been the quiet one. She is 21 years old. She is technically a princess, but she chooses to go by Lady instead. She went to St. Andrews like William and Kate. She worked at a garden center during summer breaks. She competes in carriage driving competitions under the name Mountbatten Windsor. She is not the royal you expect to be at the center of family tension. But when Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022, and the details of who got what started to surface, Louise's name kept coming up in ways that apparently did not sit well with Camilla's side of the family. Here's the baseline. When Queen Elizabeth died, the big stuff went where everyone expected. King Charles got Balmoral Castle and its 53,000 acres in Scotland, plus Sandringham House and its 20,000 acres in Norfolk. Together, those properties are worth around £550 million. Those are the monarch's private estates, not the crown properties like Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle, which belong to the nation. Balmoral and Sandringham were bought privately by royal ancestors and passed down. Prince William received Highgrove among other assets. That all makes sense. That is the line of succession doing exactly what it is supposed to do. But the Queen also had a vast collection of personal items. Jewelry, art, equestrian equipment, family heirlooms, things that are not part of any official estate but carry enormous emotional and historical weight. And that is where the quiet transfer happened. Multiple sources have confirmed that Lady Louise received significant items from her grandmother's private collection, particularly things connected to the Queen's love of horses and her life at Windsor. These were not minor trinkets. These were the pieces the Queen kept close, the ones that represented her private life away from the crown. We are talking about items that had been in her daily orbit for decades, things she touched and used and loved, not display pieces that sat behind glass in some state room. These were the personal effects of a woman who reigned for 70 years, and she chose to leave them to a granddaughter who shared her quiet passions. Now, to understand why this matters so much, and why Camilla's family is upset, you have to understand that Lady Louise was not just a random grandchild. According to multiple royal insiders, she was the Queen's favorite, and not in a subtle, hard-to-tell way, in a way that palace staff noticed and commented on. A royal insider told The Sun back in 2019 that the Queen had become particularly close to Louise, and that Louise seemed to have become her favorite grandchild. Joe Little from Majesty magazine told Hello that Louise was very much treasured by both the Queen and the late Duke of Edinburgh, partly because of her fragile start in life. Louise was born a month early in 2003 after her mother Sophie faced a serious health crisis during delivery. Both Sophie and Louise were in danger, and that made them incredibly precious to the grandparents. There's the story that royal journalist Rebecca English shared about a staff member walking in on the Queen watching Mr. Tumble, a children's TV show with Louise and her brother James. The Queen of England sitting on a couch watching children's programming with her youngest grandchildren. Completely informal, no protocol, just a grandmother hanging out with kids she adored. That is the kind of relationship they had. She could not do that with William and Harry. They were already teenagers when Louise was born. The age gap meant the Queen got to have a different, more relaxed grandmother experience with Louise. She got to be present in a way that the demands of the crown had prevented when her own children were young. And certainly when William and Harry were small and Diana was still alive and the media circus was at its peak. With Louise, there was space and time and a kind of ordinary closeness that the Queen had rarely been able to enjoy. So that is the foundation. The Queen had a deep, documented special bond with this particular granddaughter. And then Prince Philip died in April 2021 and the inheritance pattern started becoming visible. Prince Philip's will was sealed, which is standard for senior royals, but details still emerged about who got his most personal possessions. His most cherished items did not go to Charles. They did not go to William or Harry or any of his 4 children. They went to Lady Louise. Specifically, he left her his dark green 4-wheeled carriage, custom-built to his specifications, and his 2 fell ponies, Balmoral Nevis and Notla Storm. You have to understand how much carriage driving meant to Prince Philip. This was not a casual hobby. He helped create competitive carriage driving in Britain in the 1970s. He competed internationally into his 80s. This sport was a defining part of his identity. The ponies he left to Louise actually stood inside Windsor Castle during his funeral procession. On the empty seat of his carriage were his cap, whip, brown gloves, and a red pot with sugar lumps he used to reward the ponies. That image was seen around the world. And those ponies, that carriage, that whole legacy went to a 17-year-old granddaughter who shared his passion, not to his eldest son, not to the heir to the throne, but to the teenager who had spent hours practicing with him, listening to him, learning from him. That decision spoke volumes about where Philip placed his trust in his heart. Louise learned to drive carriages from her grandfather. By her mid-teens, she was competing at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. In September 2024, she placed second in the British National Carriage Driving Championships, competing under Mountbatten Windsor. She did not just inherit the items, she inherited the skill and the commitment. Philip saw that, he chose her, and that choice was not made lightly. Philip was a man who understood legacy, who had spent his entire adult life in service to an institution that measures everything by blood and duty and continuity. He knew exactly what it meant to leave his most treasured possessions to Louise instead of to Charles or William. He knew the statement it would make. So now you have got both grandparents, the Queen and Prince Philip, separately choosing Louise as a recipient of their most personal, emotionally significant possessions. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern, and that pattern is where the tension with Camilla's family starts to make sense. Queen Camilla's children are Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. They are not royals, they will never be royals. Tom has been open about this. He told People magazine, "We are married in, we are not the royal family." He is a food writer. Laura curates art and co-founded London's 11 Gallery. Their children call King Charles Yupa and Queen Camilla Gaga, which shows they have a real family bond. They are included in gatherings. Tom's son Freddie and Laura's twin sons Gus and Louis served as pages of honor to Camilla at the coronation. They are loved and included, but they are not heirs. They do not receive royal treasures. They do not carry on centuries-old traditions. They are, as Tom himself put it, married in. And there is a vast, unbridgeable distance between being loved and being legitimate in the eyes of the institution. That creates a difficult dynamic when Louise, who is 17th in line to the throne and a princess by birth, even though she does not use the title, receives item after item of deep personal significance from both the Queen and Prince Philip. From Camilla's perspective, this has to sting. She spent years as the other woman. She faced intense public criticism after Diana's death. She worked for decades to improve her image, supported Charles through incredibly difficult periods, and eventually became queen consort and then queen. But her biological children and grandchildren remain outside the royal legacy. They get the family gatherings, but not the inheritance. They get the affection, but not the heirlooms. They get the Christmas dinners at Sandringham, but not the carriage that belonged to the Duke of Edinburgh or the private collection of the late Queen. Sources have indicated there were difficult discussions about how to distribute the Queen's personal belongings. The biggest estates, nobody questioned those. Charles gets Balmoral and Sandringham. That is the law, that is the tradition. But the emotional items, the pieces that carry personal meaning rather than legal title, those became a source of private tension because every piece that went to Louise was a piece that did not go to Camilla's family. And the message that sends is hard to ignore. It says quietly but unmistakably that there is an inner circle and an outer circle. And Camilla's children, despite decades of integration, remain in the outer circle. Then there is the Sophie factor. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, is Louise's mother, and she adds another layer to why Camilla might be nervous about all this. Sophie was once referred to as Queen Elizabeth's favorite daughter-in-law. Some called her the Queen's secret weapon. While the world focused on Diana and then Kate, Sophie quietly built strong, genuine relationships within the family. She became someone the Queen relied on, someone who could be trusted with difficult conversations and sensitive moments. She was steady and loyal and never sought the spotlight, qualities the Queen valued above almost everything else. Now there is history here. Back in 2001, Sophie got caught in a scandal after making negative comments about various royals to an undercover reporter, and one of her biggest criticisms was about Charles's relationship with Camilla. Both women have moved on publicly since then. Sophie left her PR job to become a full-time royal. Camilla married Charles and became queen. They appear together at events, support causes, show a united front. But according to author Sean Smith, who wrote Sophie, Saving the Royal Family, the dynamics are still complicated. Old wounds do not always heal completely, especially in a family where so much goes unspoken and appearances must be maintained at all costs. At 60, Sophie plays a unique role connecting the younger generation like Princess Kate with older royals like Camilla and Princess Anne. Commentators have noted that Sophie follows in Princess Diana's footsteps with her humanitarian work. Visits to conflict zones, advocacy for victims of sexual violence and war, landmine awareness, all of these echo Diana's well-known causes. And Diana was Camilla's old rival. So Sophie doing this work while being the mother of the grandchildren who keep receiving meaningful inheritances, that is a lot of layers. It is a constant, quiet reminder of a past that Camilla has spent years trying to move beyond. Sophie's children, Louise and James, represent something specific, the continuation of the royal bloodline. They are royal by birth. They carry the Mountbatten-Windsor name. They are in the line of succession. In contrast, Camilla's children and grandchildren are part of the family but remain on the sidelines, not in the line of succession, not carrying the name. That difference creates ongoing tension even when everyone behaves perfectly in public. It is a kind of tension that never gets discussed openly, but simmers beneath every family gathering, every holiday photo, every seating arrangement at state occasions. And here's what makes Louise's position even more interesting. She is technically a princess. When she was born in 2003, she became Her Royal Highness Princess Louise of Wessex under the 1917 letters Pat, which gives princely status to all male-line grandchildren of the monarch. But her parents, Prince Edward and Sophie, decided their children would be styled as the children of an Earl, Lady Louise and Viscount Severn, not Prince and Princess. Sophie explained in a 2016 BBC interview that they wanted Louise and James to understand they would likely have to work for a living. They wanted them to have as normal a childhood as possible, to build their own identities outside the weight of royal titles. When Louise turned 18 in November 2021, she could have claimed her princess title in royal style. She chose not to. Instead, she enrolled at the University of St. Andrews. She worked at a garden center during summer breaks. She joined the University Officer Training Corps and started military training. She competes in carriage driving under her legal name. She goes to university like any other student. She is training for a possible military career. She is by every available measure building a life of substance rather than a life of status. This choice may actually give her more power. She gets the benefits of royal birth without the heavy responsibilities that come with using the title. Compare this to Harry and Meghan. When they tried to create independent lives while keeping their royal titles, they faced harsh backlash. The family was divided. They moved to California and they still deal with challenges from the British press. Louise decided early on to be just Louise. She is playing the long game, keeping her royal benefits while building her own identity. And in doing so, she has made herself far more useful to the future monarchy than if she had insisted on being called princess. And it is working. When she appears at events like Trooping the Colour, she gets attention. In 2024, she was the only non-working royal to be on the balcony with the Wales children. When she stood vigil at her grandmother's coffin with her brother and cousins, people noticed her composure. She's building a reputation without asking for one. She's becoming known not for titles or scandals or fashion choices, but for quiet competence and genuine skill. That is incredibly rare in the modern royal landscape, and it makes her enormously valuable. Now let us talk about the future, because this is where the inheritance situation could actually reshape the monarchy. Royal expert Richard Eden made a surprising prediction. He said that when Prince William becomes king, he hopes William will follow Queen Elizabeth's example and ask his cousins, including Lady Louise and James, to help with royal duties. That statement reveals a real problem. There are not many working royals in William's generation. Harry is no longer involved. Andrew has faced issues and stepped back. Beatrice and Eugenie do not have full-time royal roles. That means mainly William, Kate, and eventually their children will represent the crown. The pool is shallow and Louise is young, capable, has military experience, has a strong lineage, and carries herself with a calm, dignified presence. At Trooping the Colour 2024, she was a prominent part of the military parade, which many royal commentators saw as a sign of her future role. She is being positioned carefully and deliberately as a resource the monarchy can draw upon when the time comes. So think about what the inheritance actually represents. Louise did not just receive carriages and ponies from Philip or equestrian treasures from Elizabeth. She received their approval. By leaving their personal items to Louise, both Philip and Elizabeth showed who they trusted, who they believed embodied their values, who they saw as carrying forward something important about the family. That is not just about stuff. That is about legitimacy. It is about being chosen by the two people who define the modern monarchy. In royal families, inheritance signifies more than money or property. It signals who is central to the monarchy and who is on the edges. It is about continuity, about who matters in the long story of the institution. Louise has inherited that legitimacy. Camilla's children and grandchildren have not. They are included in family photos and holiday gatherings, and they clearly have a loving relationship with Charles, but they did not receive the torch. There was no passing of items that say you are part of this legacy. There was no moment where the Queen or Prince Philip looked at them and said, "This belongs to you now because you are part of what we are building for the future." That is why the reported fury makes sense. It is not about being jealous of a carriage or some horse equipment. It is about seeing the bigger picture. The royal family is planning for the future, and that future includes Lady Louise in a way it does not include Tom Parker Bowles or Laura Lopes or their children. The quiet princess who chose not to use her title is being positioned as a potential working royal, a backup for William's slimmed-down monarchy. And the personal items from both grandparents are the visible proof of that positioning. They are the tangible evidence of a choice that was made long before the public started paying attention. As King Charles faces health challenges and the monarchy prepares for transition, Louise's role will become increasingly important. She has been trained in discretion. She has proven she can handle public attention without seeking it. She has the bloodline, the skills, and now the symbolic inheritance that says she belongs at the center of this family. Camilla's family, for all their inclusion and affection, do not have any of that. They are loved but not legitimate in the institutional sense. And that distinction, which might have seemed abstract a decade ago, is now being made concrete through who got what from the Queen's private collection. Every item that went to Louise is a brick in a wall that separates the bloodline from everyone else, no matter how beloved they may be. The whole thing reveals something about how royal families actually work. The public sees the weddings and the funerals and the balcony appearances, but the real decisions about who matters happen quietly through wills and private gifts, and who gets invited to which room at which estate. Lady Louise has been moving through those rooms for years, quietly, without demanding attention, without claiming titles she's entitled to, just being present and capable and connected to her grandparents in a genuine way. And now that strategy, whether it was intentional or just who she is, has resulted in her holding pieces of both Prince Philip's legacy and Queen Elizabeth's private world. That is not luck. That is the outcome of being the grandchild who showed up, shared their interests, and did not make everything about status. She put in the time, she learned the skills, she built the relationships, and the inheritance is simply the public confirmation of what the family already knew. Camilla's family, through no fault of their own, cannot compete with that. They were not born into this. They married in, and the monarchy, for all its modernization, still draws a bright line between blood and marriage when it comes to legacy. Tom Parker Bowles seems to understand this and has made peace with it publicly. But the reported fury behind palace doors suggests not everyone on that side of the family is as accepting. And honestly, it is hard to blame them for being upset. Watching a 21-year-old receive heirlooms that carry centuries of meaning while your own children, who call the king Yupa and serve as pages of honor at the coronation, get nothing of equivalent weight, that has to hurt. It has to feel like a rejection, even if it was never intended as one. But it also reveals exactly where the institution is headed, and that direction points toward Lady Louise. She is the future the monarchy is quietly preparing for, and the inheritance proves it.